Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries about the dark secrets of the ultra-wealthy. The Al Habtoor Palace Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a vision of opulence that would make even Dubai's most extravagant weddings pale in comparison. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors, while thousands of white roses imported from Holland created cascading arrangements that reached toward the gold leaf ceiling. The guest list read like a who's who of the UAE's business elite. Oil magnates, real estate tycoons, and government officials all gathered to witness what many whispered was the most controversial union of the social season. At the center of it all stood Layla Mansouri, 27 years old and breathtakingly beautiful in her custom Elie Saab gown that had cost more than most people's annual salary. Her dark hair was swept into an elaborate updo adorned with diamonds that caught the light with every movement, and her olive skin glowed with the kind of radiance that only youth could provide. But beneath her serene smile and perfectly applied makeup, anxiety gnawed at her stomach like a living thing. Beside her, Omar Al-Zara cut an imposing figure despite, or perhaps because of, his 54 years. His silver-streaked beard was meticulously groomed. His traditional white kandura was tailored to perfection, and his dark eyes held the confidence of a man who had built a construction empire worth over 3 billion dirhams. The 27-year age gap between them had been the subject of endless gossip in Dubai's social circles. But Omar's wealth and influence had silenced most critics. After all, in a city built on ambition and transformation, unconventional marriages were often overlooked when enough zeros were involved. The ceremony itself had been a masterpiece of traditional elegance. The imam's voice had echoed through the ballroom as he recited verses from the Quran, blessing their union before an audience of 700 guests. Layla had signed the marriage contract with hands that trembled slightly, though everyone assumed it was from joy rather than the terror that actually coursed through her veins. Omar had pursued her relentlessly for 8 months, ever since they'd met at a charity gala for Syrian refugees. He'd been immediately captivated by her beauty and apparent innocence, seeing in her the perfect wife to complement his status and provide him with the sons he'd always wanted. His first marriage, to a woman his own age, had ended in divorce 15 years earlier when she'd failed to give him children, a failure he'd blamed entirely on her, despite medical evidence suggesting otherwise. Layla, for her part, had been working as a marketing coordinator for a luxury hotel chain when Omar had swept into her life like a force of nature. She'd grown up in a middle-class family in Sharjah, her father a government clerk and her mother a schoolteacher. They were respectable people, but they lived paycheck to paycheck, and the idea of marrying into one of Dubai's wealthiest families had seemed like a dream come true. But dreams, Layla had learned, often came with nightmares attached. The reception was in full swing now, with traditional Emirati musicians playing oud and tabla while guests feasted on lamb ozi and saffron rice. Omar held court at the head table, regaling his business associates with stories of his latest real estate acquisitions, his hand possessively resting on Layla's thigh beneath the table. She smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, playing the role of the devoted young wife, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the secret she'd carried for the past 3 years, the one that could destroy not just this marriage, but her entire future. In her small apartment in Sharjah, carefully hidden in a box beneath her bed, were documents that told a story Omar could never know. Medical records, birth certificates, and photographs that painted a picture of a life she'd been forced to leave behind. When she was 24, Layla had fallen in love with a Palestinian refugee named Khalil who worked as a mechanic in her neighborhood. Their relationship had been passionate but brief, ending when Khalil had been deported back to Jordan for visa violations. But their love affair had left behind something precious and terrifying, a daughter named Noor. Layla had given birth in secret, telling her family she was studying abroad for a semester. The baby had been born healthy and beautiful, with Khalil's dark eyes and Layla's delicate features. For 3 months, Layla had lived in a small apartment in Ayman, caring for her daughter and trying to figure out how to build a life as a single mother in a society that would never accept her. The decision to give Noor up for adoption had been the hardest thing Layla had ever done. She found a loving family in Canada, a Palestinian couple who couldn't have children of their own, and had arranged for them to adopt Noor through a private agency. The last time she'd held her daughter, Noor had been sleeping peacefully, her tiny fingers wrapped around Layla's thumb as if she never wanted to let go. Now, sitting beside her new husband in a ballroom full of Dubai's elite, Layla felt the weight of that secret pressing down on her like a physical force. Omar had made it clear from the beginning that he expected his wife to be pure, untouched, ready to give him the sons that would carry on his legacy. He'd even insisted on a medical examination before their engagement, though Layla had managed to find a discreet doctor who'd been willing to provide the documentation Omar required in exchange for a substantial fee. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now married to a man who could give her daughter everything she'd never been able to provide: education, opportunities, a future without limits, but who would destroy them both if he ever learned the truth. As the evening wore on, Omar's business partner Rashid Al Maktoum approached their table with a knowing smile. He was a man in his 60s who'd built his fortune in oil and had a reputation for knowing everyone's secrets in Dubai's tight-knit business community. "Omar, my friend," Rashid said, his voice carrying just loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "you've certainly outdone yourself with this beautiful bride. Though I have to say, she looks familiar. Didn't I see her at the Burj Al Arab a few years ago? She was with a different man then, if I remember correctly." Layla's blood turned to ice. She forced herself to smile and shake her head. "I think you must be mistaken, Uncle Rashid. I've only been to the Burj Al Arab once, and that was with my family for my cousin's wedding." But she could see the wheels turning in Rashid's mind, and she noticed how Omar's grip on her thigh had tightened. In Dubai's small elite circle, rumors traveled faster than the city's legendary supercars, and Layla knew that her carefully constructed new life was about to face its first real test. As the night progressed, and they prepared to retire to their honeymoon suite at the hotel's penthouse, Layla whispered a silent prayer that her secrets would remain buried. But in a city where information was currency and privacy was a luxury few could afford, she had a sinking feeling that her past was about to collide with her present in the most devastating way possible. The penthouse suite at the Al Habtoor Palace was a testament to Dubai's obsession with luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the glittering city below, Italian marble floors, and a king-size bed draped in silk sheets scattered with rose petals. But the tension between Omar and Layla was palpable as they entered their honeymoon suite. Omar had been unusually quiet during the elevator ride, his jaw clenched and his eyes distant. Layla recognized the signs. She'd seen this expression whenever something displeased him during their courtship. "That was a beautiful ceremony," Layla said softly, trying to break the silence as she moved toward the window. "Your mother seemed pleased." Omar loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of whiskey from the suite's well-stocked bar. "My mother has excellent judgment about people," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made Layla's stomach tighten. "She can usually tell when someone is being authentic." The word hung in the air like a challenge. "What do you mean by that?" Omar took a slow sip of his whiskey, studying her over the rim of the glass. "Rashid Al Maktoum is an old friend. He has an excellent memory for faces. He said he remembered you being at the Burj Al Arab about 3 years ago, and you were with a young man. A man who looked foreign." Layla's heart began to race. "Omar, Habibti, you're letting gossip upset you on our wedding night. Rashid is an old man. Perhaps his memory isn't as sharp as he thinks." But Omar pulled out his phone and began scrolling through messages, his expression growing darker. "I made some calls during the reception. Discreet inquiries." He showed her his phone screen, and Layla's blood turned to ice. There, in grainy but unmistakable detail, was a photograph of her from 3 years ago. She was visibly pregnant, walking out of a medical clinic in Iman. This was taken by a security camera at the Al Noor Medical Center. Omar said, his voice deadly quiet, "The same clinic where you gave birth to a daughter on March 15th, 3 years ago. A daughter you gave up for adoption to a family in Canada." Layla's legs gave out, and she sank into the nearest chair. The secret she guarded so carefully was now laid bare before the man who valued purity above all else. I know about Khalil Mansouri, the Palestinian mechanic who was deported. I know about the 3 months you spent in Iman. I know about the adoption agency in Toronto. Each revelation was like a dagger to Layla's heart. "Omar, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" he roared. "Explain how you lied to me for 8 months. Explain how you let me believe I was marrying a pure, untouched woman." He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her. "I paid for medical examinations that confirmed your purity. How much did you pay that doctor to lie for you?" 50,000 dirhams, she whispered. "But Omar, I haven't been with anyone since Khalil. I've lived like a nun for 3 years, waiting for a fool rich enough to marry damaged goods." Omar spat. "Do you have any idea what this means for me? When this gets out, I'll be the laughingstock of Dubai." He walked to the bedroom, returning with something that made Layla's heart stop. In his hand was an ornate letter opener, its silver blade gleaming in the soft light. "There's only one way to ensure that this secret never destroys my reputation," he said, his voice eerily calm. "A tragic accident on our wedding night would be much easier to explain than a divorce." The ornate letter opener caught the light from the crystal chandelier, its silver blade reflecting Layla's terrified face as Omar advanced toward her. The luxurious penthouse suite, which moments ago had seemed like a palace from a fairy tale, now felt like a gilded prison where her life was about to end. "Omar, please," Layla whispered, backing toward the marble wall. "Think about what you're doing. Think about your reputation if you kill me. Murder won't solve anything. It will only make things worse." Omar's grip tightened on the letter opener, his knuckles white with tension. "Murder is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as damage control. A tragic accident on our wedding night. Perhaps you slipped in the bathroom, hit your head. These marble floors can be so dangerous." The cold calculation in his voice terrified Layla more than his anger had. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a businessman solving a problem, eliminating a threat to his carefully constructed image. "You think people will believe that?" Layla asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You think the police won't investigate? You think your business partners won't ask questions?" Omar paused, considering her words. For a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. "The police in Dubai are understanding when it comes to men in my position. Accidents happen, especially to young wives who might be unstable, overwhelmed by the pressure of marrying into such a prominent family." He began pacing again, the letter opener still in his hand, working through the logistics like he was planning a construction project. "You've been acting strangely all evening. Several guests noticed how nervous you seemed. My mother even commented on it. When they find your body, it will be clear that you were troubled, perhaps suicidal." Layla felt sick as she realized how thoroughly he'd already planned this. "You've been thinking about this all night, haven't you? Even during our wedding ceremony, you were planning to kill me." "I've been thinking about protecting my family's honor," Omar corrected. "About minimizing the damage you've caused. About ensuring that the Al-Zahra name remains untainted by your deception." Layla's mind raced, searching for anything that might save her life. "What about my family? My parents will ask questions. They'll want to know what happened to their daughter." Omar's laugh was bitter. "Your family? The government clerk and the schoolteacher from Sharjah? They'll be told that their daughter died tragically on her wedding night, and they'll be given a generous settlement to help them through their grief. Money has a way of quieting uncomfortable questions." The casual way he dismissed her family's love for her, reducing their potential grief to a financial transaction, made Layla's anger flare alongside her fear. "You're a monster. I thought I knew you, but you're nothing but a cold, calculating monster." "I'm a businessman," Omar replied calmly. "I make difficult decisions to protect my investments. You were an investment that turned out to be fraudulent. Now I'm cutting my losses." He moved closer, and Layla could smell the whiskey on his breath mixed with the expensive cologne he'd worn for their wedding. "It doesn't have to be painful, Layla. If you cooperate, I can make it quick." Desperation gave Layla strength she didn't know she possessed. As Omar raised the letter opener, she grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the side table and swung it at his head with all her might. The vase connected with his temple, sending him staggering backward, blood trickling down his face. "You bitch!" Omar roared, touching the wound on his head. "You just made this much worse for yourself." Layla ran toward the bedroom, her elaborate wedding dress hampering her movements. Behind her, she could hear Omar cursing in Arabic, his footsteps heavy on the marble floor as he pursued her. She reached the bedroom and slammed the door, frantically looking for something to barricade it with. The door exploded inward as Omar threw his shoulder against it, the force sending Layla tumbling backward onto the silk-covered bed. Rose petals scattered around her like drops of blood, and she scrambled to get away from him. "You want to fight?" Omar snarled, wiping blood from his face. "Fine, let's fight, but you should know that I always win." Layla grabbed the champagne bottle from the ice bucket beside the bed, holding it like a weapon. "Stay away from me. Someone will hear us. The hotel staff will come. The penthouse is soundproofed," Omar said, advancing slowly like a predator stalking wounded prey. "I specifically requested it for our privacy. No one will hear you scream." The cat-and-mouse game continued for several minutes, with Layla using the bedroom furniture to stay out of Omar's reach. But she was tiring, her wedding dress catching on everything, and she knew she couldn't evade him forever. "You know what the irony is?" Omar said as he cornered her near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I actually could have forgiven you. If you'd been honest from the beginning, if you'd told me about your past, I might have been able to work with it. But the lying, the deception, that's unforgivable." Layla's back was pressed against the cool glass, the lights of Dubai twinkling 40 floors below. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I was afraid you'd reject me, that you'd think I wasn't good enough for you." "You were right to be afraid," Omar said coldly, "because you're not good enough. You never were." As he lunged forward with the letter opener, Layla closed her eyes and thought of her daughter Noor, safe and loved in Canada, never knowing that her mother was about to die for the crime of trying to build a better life. The last thing she saw was Omar's face, twisted with rage and disgust, as her fairy tale marriage came to its brutal end. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of the penthouse suite, its golden rays illuminating a scene that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Layla lay motionless near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her wedding dress stained crimson, the ornate letter opener protruding from her chest. The rose petals that had once symbolized love and new beginnings were now scattered across a crime scene that contradicted everything the luxury hotel represented. Omar sat in the velvet armchair where Layla had first learned of his discovery, staring at his hands in disbelief. The rage that had consumed him hours earlier had evaporated, leaving behind only the crushing weight of what he had done. Blood from the wound on his temple had dried, creating a dark stain on his white kandura, evidence of Layla's desperate fight for survival. The reality of his situation began to sink in as the adrenaline faded. He was a 54-year-old businessman who had just murdered his 27-year-old bride on their wedding night. No amount of money or influence could completely erase that fact, but Omar's survival instincts kicked in as he began to formulate a plan. He stood up slowly, his legs unsteady, and walked to the bar. His hands shook as he poured another whiskey, the amber liquid sloshing in the crystal glass. He needed to think clearly, to approach this like any other business crisis that required careful management and strategic thinking. First, he examined the scene with the cold calculation of a man who had built an empire through careful planning. The struggle had been contained to the bedroom area. The champagne bottle Layla had used as a weapon lay shattered on the Persian rug, its contents mixing with her blood. The overturned furniture told a story of violence, but Omar knew that with the right narrative, it could be reframed as something else entirely. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, stopping a name he'd hoped never to use: Mahmoud al-Rashid, a former police detective who now worked as a private security consultant for Dubai's elite. Mahmoud specialized in making problems disappear, and his services came at a premium that only the wealthiest could afford. "Mahmoud," Omar said when the call connected, his voice surprisingly steady. "I need your help. There's been an accident. 20 minutes later, Mahmoud arrived at the penthouse suite with two associates. Men whose faces Omar didn't recognize and whose names he didn't want to know. They moved through the scene with professional efficiency, photographing everything from multiple angles before beginning their work. "Tell me what happened," Mahmoud said, his voice neutral and businesslike. Omar recounted a carefully edited version of events. "My wife was distraught about something. I think the pressure of the wedding, of marrying into my family, was too much for her. She'd been drinking, and she became hysterical. She attacked me with a champagne bottle, and in the struggle to defend myself, she fell and struck her head on the marble floor." Mahmoud examined the wound on Omar's temple and nodded. "The injury is consistent with your story, but the letter opener, she grabbed it from the bar." Omar lied smoothly. "She was threatening to hurt herself. I tried to take it away from her, and in the struggle," he let his voice trail off, allowing Mahmoud to fill in the blanks. The security consultant studied the scene for several more minutes, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. "This can be managed," he said finally, "but it will be expensive, and it will require your complete cooperation." Over the next hour, Mahmoud and his team worked to alter the crime scene. They repositioned Layla's body to make it appear as though she had fallen and struck her head on the marble corner of the bedside table. The letter opener was cleaned and returned to its place at the bar. The champagne bottle was replaced with an identical one, and the bloodstains were carefully cleaned and repositioned to support the new narrative. "The story is simple," Mahmoud explained as his team finished their work. "Your wife was overwhelmed by the wedding and had been drinking heavily. She became emotional and unstable. You tried to comfort her, but she became violent and attacked you. In the struggle, she fell and struck her head. You immediately called for medical help, but it was too late." Omar nodded, memorizing every detail of the fabricated story. "What about the hotel staff? The security cameras?" "Leave that to me," Mahmoud replied. "The hotel management will be very cooperative once they understand the situation. A scandal like this would be devastating for their reputation. As for the cameras, there are ways to ensure that the footage supports our version of events." As dawn broke over Dubai, Omar found himself alone in the suite once again, but now everything had changed. The scene had been carefully staged to support his story, and within hours, the hotel would be swarming with police, paramedics, and investigators who would find exactly what Mahmoud wanted them to find. Omar's phone buzzed with messages from family members and business associates who had heard about the tragic accident. His mother was already on her way to the hotel, and his business partners were offering their condolences and support. The narrative was already taking hold. The grieving widower whose young wife had been unable to handle the pressure of their high-profile marriage. But as Omar stood at the window, looking out at the city that had made him wealthy and powerful, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine fear. Not fear of being caught. Mahmoud's work was too thorough for that, but fear of what he had become. In protecting his reputation, he had destroyed his soul. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to preserve his honor, he had committed the most dishonorable act imaginable. He had murdered an innocent young woman whose only crime had been trying to build a better life for herself and her child. As the first sirens wailed in the distance, Omar straightened his shoulders and prepared to play the role of the grieving husband. He would mourn publicly, establish a charity in Layla's name, and eventually remarry someone more suitable to his station. Life would go on, and Dubai's elite would eventually forget about the tragic young bride who had died on her wedding night. But Omar would never forget. In the quiet moments between business meetings and social obligations, he would remember Layla's terrified eyes and her desperate pleas for mercy. He would remember the weight of the letter opener in his hand and the moment when he chose his reputation over her life. The cover-up was perfect, but the guilt would be his life sentence. 6 months after Layla's death, Omar Al-Zara had become Dubai's most sympathetic widower. The official investigation had concluded exactly as Mahmoud had orchestrated: a tragic accident involving a young bride overwhelmed by the pressures of high society marriage. The coroner's report cited blunt force trauma from a fall, and the case was quietly closed without further investigation. Omar played his role perfectly. He established the Layla Al Foundation for Women's Mental Health, donating 5 million dirhams to support young women struggling with depression and anxiety. He gave interviews about the importance of recognizing mental health issues in traditional societies, becoming an unlikely advocate for psychological wellness in the UAE. The business community rallied around him. Contracts that had been delayed were fast-tracked, and new partnerships emerged as Dubai's elite showed their support for the grieving widower. His construction empire grew stronger than ever, and his reputation as a man of honor and compassion was solidified. But success came with a price that no amount of money could pay. Omar's nights were haunted by memories of Layla's final moments. He would wake in cold sweats, hearing her voice pleading for mercy, seeing her terrified eyes as she realized he intended to kill her. The sleeping pills his doctor prescribed barely helped, and alcohol only made the nightmares worse. During the day, he threw himself into work with obsessive intensity, but even the most complex business deals couldn't distract him from the weight of his guilt. He found himself avoiding mirrors, unable to look at his own reflection without seeing a murderer staring back. The breaking point came during a charity gala for his foundation. As Omar gave a speech about Layla's legacy and the importance of supporting vulnerable women, he spotted someone in the crowd that made his blood run cold. Detective Sarah Mitchell from the Dubai police had been watching him throughout the evening, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. After the event, she approached him with a knowing smile. "Mr. Alzara, I wanted to express my condolences again. Your wife's death was truly tragic." "Thank you, Detective," Omar replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "The foundation work helps me feel closer to her memory." "I'm sure it does," Detective Mitchell said, her tone carefully neutral. "I've been reviewing some old cases recently, including your wife's accident. There were a few details that caught my attention." Omar's heart pounded, but he maintained his composure. "Oh, what kind of details?" "Small things. The angle of the head wound, the pattern of blood spatter, the positioning of the body. Sometimes these details tell a different story than the obvious one." She handed him her business card. "If you ever want to talk about that night, really talk about it, please call me." Sometimes the truth has a way of eating at a person's conscience. As Detective Mitchell walked away, Omar realized that his perfect crime might not be as perfect as he believed. The investigation might be officially closed, but some people never stopped looking for the truth. That night, Omar sat in his empty mansion, surrounded by luxury, but feeling utterly alone. He thought about Layla's daughter Noor, growing up in Canada without knowing that her mother had been murdered by the man who was supposed to protect her. He thought about Layla's parents, who still sent him grateful messages thanking him for the generous settlement he'd provided after their daughter's accident. The irony was crushing. In trying to preserve his honor, he had become the most dishonorable man he knew. In protecting his reputation, he had destroyed his humanity. In silencing Layla's voice, he had condemned himself to a lifetime of guilt and fear. Omar pulled out his phone and stared at Detective Mitchell's business card. Part of him wanted to call her, to confess everything, to finally tell the truth about what had happened in that penthouse suite. But he knew that confession would destroy not just him, but everyone connected to the cover-up. Instead, he poured another whiskey and walked to the window of his study, looking out at the glittering lights of Dubai. Somewhere in this city, Mahmoud al-Rashid was probably helping another wealthy man cover up another crime. Somewhere, corrupt officials were counting the money that had bought their silence. Somewhere, the truth was buried beneath layers of lies and influence. But the truth had a way of surfacing, just like Detective Mitchell had said. And Omar knew that someday, somehow, he would have to pay for what he had done to Layla. Until then, he would continue to play the role of the grieving widower, building his empire on the foundation of a young woman's blood, living with the knowledge that he had committed the perfect crime, and that it was slowly destroying him from the inside. In Dubai, a city built on transformation and reinvention, Omar al-Zura had successfully transformed himself from a murderer into a saint. But some transformations come at a price that can never be fully paid.